After every photo shoot, you're doing one of two things, and neither is actually making you any better. By the end of this video, you'll have a 5-point checklist that turns every session into a lesson, so you stop making the same mistakes twice. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Karen. I taught myself photography and I grew a 13-year portrait business. And I'm here to make learning photography so much less complicated than most other people make it. If you want a shortcut to everything I'm talking about today, grab my Fix It Fast guide. It's free and it's linked below. Okay, let me tell you what most beginners do after every shoot and why it's keeping them stuck. They're either looking through their camera roll after their session saying, "These photos are so good, I love them, they look perfect," or they're comparing themselves to everybody on Instagram, feeling like their photos will never be good enough and that they failed another session. But neither of those is gonna help you evaluate your photos, and neither one will help you improve. When I started out years ago, I had a family session and I thought, all these photos are gonna turn out amazing because I had chosen to shoot the whole session in f2.8. And the problem was, I didn't have enough experience to know that you can't shoot a 6-member family photo shoot on such a low aperture and expect to get everybody in focus perfectly. And what I didn't realize at the time was that you need a lot of space between you and the clients in order to broaden that plane of focus. And if not everybody's side by side, some people who are closer to the camera are going to be in focus and the people behind them are going to be slightly out of focus. And that's exactly what happened. I looked through these photos when I got home and I was so disappointed in myself. I even offered to reshoot the session for the client, but she didn't see any problem with the photos and she thought they were beautiful. And to a degree, they were okay in the sense that from far out, everybody looked okay, but when I zoomed in, I could tell everybody's eyes were really soft and fuzzy and nothing was in sharp detail the way that I wanted them to be. It was a really hard lesson for me to learn because this family trusted me to take amazing photos, and these memories, they're gonna keep them forever. So my goal was to learn everything I could about evaluating my photos and doing a much better job next time. So the first point on this 5-point checklist is exposure. Whether you're shooting in auto or manual mode or even a partial manual mode, you wanna make sure your photos are properly exposed. And what that basically means is you want them to look the same brightness or darkness as they do to the naked eye in real life. But if we're not quite sure how to get the exposure correct with our manual settings or any other modes we might be using, it can set our photos off and make them look really bad. I also want to mention that this is a really subjective process. So while your photos might look natural or how they are in real life, you may choose to make your photos more bright or darker, just depending on the mood you're going for and the whole artistic effect of your photos. But in general, we want our photos to be bright enough so we can tell what we're supposed to look at in the photo. And if you are shooting in manual mode, it can be really challenging when you're trying to learn the exposure triangle and get all those settings correct. But there is an amazing tool that helps you figure that out as you're going along, and it's called the exposure meter. This is the little bracketed number line that's in the viewfinder of your camera, and as you're playing with your settings and trying to get them correct, if you press your shutter button down halfway, it'll show you exactly where you fall on that meter. The center line is perfectly exposed, and anything to the right of it is going to be overexposed, anything to the left is underexposed. And I hate to admit this, but it took me way too many years to discover what the exposure meter was. It would have saved me so much trouble. When I was learning manual mode, I was just confused about what's the standard? How do we know what's a perfect exposure here? Or is it just a subjective process? Like, how do I figure this out? And it was really complicated. So I was going through a ton of trial and error. And then once I finally discovered the exposure meter, I was like, wow, this is amazing, because now I don't have to guess anymore. And that's what it's there for. So if you can learn how to use it early on, you're gonna save yourself a lot of trouble. The second thing on the 5-point checklist is focus. And a great guide is, what is it that you want people to focus on? Oftentimes with portraits, it's going to be looking at the eyes. And the reason being, the eyes are the window to the soul, and the eyes tell a story about how the person is feeling and what they're experiencing. I've shot some really unique photos of people's eyes over the years, and they're all unique in different ways. Some people have 2 different color eyes, and I think that's pretty cool. Some people want a close-up of their eyes with maybe their spouse's eyes. And kids and babies, oh my goodness, they are so much fun to take photos of because they are so expressive. They don't have any filter, so what they do is what they do, and if you capture it, you're going to see the whole story. And they also show so much innocence, and I absolutely love that part. And sometimes people's eyes are closed in your photos, and that can tell an even stronger story. Whether they're laughing or they're crying or whatever their expression is, but sometimes the focus is something else entirely. For engagement sessions, sometimes you want to focus on somebody's ring. and you want to blur out the background of the couple to bring your eye to focusing on that ring. And in some images, you want to get pretty much everything in focus because the whole picture tells the story altogether. So in this case, we often shoot at a higher aperture number so that we can include all those details and not have anything be soft or fuzzy or out of focus. The third thing to check is motion blur. Sometimes motion blur can be intentional, where you want to show something is moving and you don't want to get it in focus. Oftentimes people do this if they're shooting waterfalls. The motion blur that's captured with waterfalls can make a really beautiful effect, but in most cases with portraits, we want to be able to freeze that motion. I've taken a lot of fun action shots over the years in my portraits, and this is the easiest to do when you're shooting kids or toddlers, anybody who's active and doesn't want to sit still for your photo shoot. Another fun one is at fall time when kids are sitting in a pile of raked up leaves and they throw them over their heads and you catch them kind of mid-air. I've also captured some really fun photos of my son doing Taekwondo, whether it's a roundhouse kick or a flying side kick. And he's got really long hair, so it's fun to capture that part of it too because it's always wild and doing its own thing. I've also had a lot of fun shooting families or even wedding parties, jumping in the air. Everybody ends up laughing a lot because not everybody makes it very far off the ground and everybody's just having a good time doing it. So when you're taking these action shots, you want to make sure your shutter speed is high enough so that you're freezing that motion and you're not getting the blurry effect, unless you're intentionally trying to get the blurry effect. Another thing worth mentioning here is sometimes even when we're shooting subjects who are sitting still, we can be the ones moving because we're holding our camera. Sometimes we have a long lens and it's heavy, and just breathing can make us move a little bit. But if we don't have a high enough aperture or shutter speed, our photo tends to come out a little bit blurry just because we don't realize that we are moving too. And the same goes for people who are standing there trying to get their portraits taken. Maybe you have a group of people and they're swaying just a little bit or breathing as well, and kids moving just a little bit. Like, all these little things happen and we don't realize they cause motion blur in our photos, and we wonder, well, why were they out of focus? I had all of my settings correct. But those little things can sometimes contribute to a little bit of blur in your images. So checking for those types of things in situations where you wouldn't normally expect to see motion can help out a lot. Okay, number 4 is composition and framing. This one's a fun one for me. I love composition and I love thinking about how I need to structure my photo so that I can use it in a versatile way. And what I mean is, when you're taking your photo, you're going to assess, do I need to take this vertically or horizontally? Is your subject mostly going up and down, or is it going side to side? What is the main point of your image? And once you've figured out which orientation you want to shoot in, we also need to think about where the subject is in that frame. A lot of times with portraits, we end up capturing them really close up because we want to capture their features, their expression, their personality, and having them just fill the frame, being in the center of it, is really common, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of families want those type of photos because they're easy to frame on their wall and it just shows everybody really clearly. But sometimes you want to take photos that are more creative and artistic, and clients want those too a lot of times. Whether it's moving your subject over to the side so that you can capture a road that goes behind them and leading lines in the photo, or maybe you want to capture some of the background because it's just a really pretty park, or the sun is in the corner or behind the subject and you just want to make it look better. There are all sorts of different composition techniques, and I'm not going to get into the details of them right now. But the point here is to focus on what you want to capture and how you want to capture it, whether it's straightforward and direct or if it's in a more creative way. And that's going to help you frame your shot and think about how you want to make space around your subject as well. This brings up the whole point about cropping and framing your images. While most people put their photos online just digitally nowadays, a lot of people still want to print their photos out. And we want to be able to give people options to crop the photo or print out any size that they need. Many cameras will give you the option in your settings to change the ratio that your photos are taken in. Oftentimes a common ratio is shooting in 4:6. So if you were to print those photos out, they would perfectly fit into a 4:6 frame. But a common size for many people's frames is an 8:10. And if you were to take your photo and crop that down to an 8:10, if you don't have enough space around your subject, you're going to end up cutting out details that you might want in that photo. And I also want to mention, sometimes people like shooting really far out and having the subjects be really small in the center. Maybe it's a family shot and there's all this space around them. And while that looks pretty because you can see the sky and everything around them and the ground in front of them, you don't always see the subjects very well, and people often want to crop that down so that you can see them better when you print those out. So if you're going to crop those down, you're going to end up losing a lot of detail and a lot of pixels basically. And that's going to leave your subjects a lot smaller and a lot grainier. So if you're shooting in a vertical orientation, you want to be able to give a little bit of breathing room on the top and the bottom of the image so that if it is cropped down to an 8x10, you're not losing important details. And the same goes for shooting horizontally. You want to make sure you have space on either side so you're not losing things that should be in the photo if the client needs to print that out in a smaller format. And the fifth item on the checklist is white balance. White balance is simply the color temperature of your photo. If you've ever noticed that a photo looks too warm or too cool, that's white balance. We want to make sure that the goal here is to try to get our photos to look as natural as we see them in real life. And if anything, erring on the side of photos being a little bit warmer than real life, because sometimes our environment is giving off sort of a bluish hue or a cooler tone, and that may not look as flattering in your images as warming it up just a little bit. If we're shooting outside, sometimes it can be the time of day making your photos look a little bit cooler. Whatever the case may be, you want to just make sure your white balance settings are correctly set to the type of situation you're shooting in. So if it is outdoors, are you shooting in bright sun? Are you shooting in shade? And if you're shooting indoors, there's a whole bunch of different options for selecting your white balance. And you may be shooting with flash. So choosing the correct white balance from the beginning is going to help give you the most natural results in the end. And oftentimes photographers will change this in editing, but we want to start out as close as possible in camera while we're shooting. So while we have 5 different things that we can evaluate about our photos, I want to point something out here. The whole process of looking at your photos and making sure they look good is not to tear yourself apart. For many, many years, I would come home after a session and start editing the photos, and I'd look at everybody in great detail. I would blow the photo up so huge, and I would notice there were like cat hairs on somebody's sweater or little balls like pilling of their fabric. And I would just start taking off all these little things and editing them for hours. And it was such a waste of my time because I was the only person who was going to blow the photo up that big to even notice. Clients aren't looking at details the way that we do. So the point of the whole photo might be just to show their family and show people's expressions. And maybe they're doing some cute pose or they're moving, it's an action shot, whatever it is, they're looking at that. They're looking at the emotion in the photo most of the time. And all the extra stuff that photographers do to go the extra mile is really just wasting our time. And the point I'm trying to make here is that good enough is good enough. I had to learn that the hard way and stop editing all these little details that really didn't make a difference. The 5 things that I've mentioned are the things that we should be focusing on in our photos and not the little details that nobody's ever gonna see. So that's the checklist. Run it after every single shoot, and your eye will start to catch these things as you're shooting. And that's when you actually get better. The Fix It Fast guide is linked below. Go grab it. And if you've made it this far, leave me a comment and tell me what your favorite aperture is. Mine is f2.8, and it definitely causes me problems sometimes. Okay, I'll see you next time.